There are legends whispered across galaxies about tyrants who reshape entire civilizations through sheer will. Frieza was never meant to be a legend. He was meant to be absolute truth. For 10 years he vanished from the cosmos. No conquests, no proclamations, no subjects trembling beneath his gaze. Only silence, only discipline, only the refinement of hatred into something beyond mortal comprehension. When he emerged, the universe called him Black Frieza. Not for the darkness of his armor, though it shimmered like obsidian starlight. Not for the void in his heart, though mercy had long been incinerated from his soul. They called him Black because he represented the eclipse of all things. The final evolution, the perfection of tyranny itself. Other warriors trained to protect, Frieza trained to dominate. Where Goku sought strength through friendship and battle, Frieza sought strength through isolation and contempt. Where Vegeta clawed toward redemption, Frieza polished his malice until it gleamed. He did not grow. Growth implies incompleteness. Frieza refined what was already flawless, sharpening the blade of his supremacy until it could split reality. And split reality it did. The battle that followed his return was not a fight. It was a demonstration. A reminder to gods and mortals alike that power recognizes no plateau. Ultra instinct shattered against his fists like porcelain. Ultra ego crumbled like sand. The Saiyans, those perpetual thorns in his empire, learned what it meant to face something beyond transformation. Beyond adaptation. Beyond hope. The clash tore through dimensions. Energy that could vaporize star clusters collided in torrents of gold, violet, and obsidian. Space folded. Time screamed. The fabric of existence, strained beyond tolerance, began to fray. Frieza felt at first the sensation of falling through a reality that no longer wanted him. Not retreat, not defeat, displacement. The void swallowed him whole. He did not fear the darkness. Darkness had always been his kingdom. But this darkness was different. It writhed. It whispered. It hungered with a sentience that clawed at the edges of his consciousness. Frieza, who had commanded armies across 1,000 worlds, who had reduced entire species to footnotes in history, found himself suspended in a place where power alone could not dictate terms. And then the darkness spoke, not with words, with sensation, with pressure against his mind, probing for weakness, searching for the cracks where corruption could take root. It found his pride. It found his rage. It found his ambition. But it did not find submission. Frieza had spent a lifetime refusing to kneel before gods, Saiyans, and destiny itself. This hungry void would be no different. When he opened his eyes, the universe had changed. Gone were the familiar constellations. Gone was the Kai-saturated cosmos he had terrorized for decades. In their place, something older, something wounded, something that bled reality from wounds that would never heal. Frieza smiled. A new galaxy meant new subjects, new worlds to dominate, new civilizations to remind that mercy was a luxury only the weak could afford. He did not know where fate had thrown him. He did not care. Empires were not built on understanding. They were built on the ashes of those foolish enough to resist. The Emperor of the Void had been reborn, and this new reality would learn to tremble. The Imperium does not welcome visitors. It devours them. The Sea of Souls, that churning nightmare realm where emotion becomes flesh and thought becomes predator, had consumed saints and broken demigods. Mortals who gazed into its depths went mad. Psychers who channeled its power paid insanity and soul. Even the chaos gods themselves, those titanic embodiments of mortal excess, were shaped by the warp's endless hunger. Frieza floated in its depths, and the warp recoiled, not in fear. The warp knew no fear, but in confusion, in curiosity, in the predatory interest of a shark that has found something new swimming in its ocean. Demons circled at a distance, their forms shifting between beautiful and grotesque, testing the waters around this strange intruder. They whispered promises. They shrieked threats. They offered everything the warp could provide to those who would serve. Frieza listened to none of it. His mind, that fortress of ego and ambition, presented no handholds for corruption. The warp searched for doubt and found only certainty. It probed for hidden shame and discovered only pride polished to a mirror sheen. It sought the cracks of trauma, the wounds of loss, the scars of defeat, and encountered nothing but the smooth surface of absolute self-belief. Korn reached for him first, sensing the mountain of corpses in Frieza's wake. The blood god offered endless war, infinite battle, the glory of carnage without end. Frieza felt the offer like heat against his skin. He examined it, considered it, and rejected it with contempt. War was a tool, not a purpose. Slaughter without strategy was the domain of beasts, and Frieza had never been a beast. He was a sovereign. Slaanesh came next, whispering of perfection, of sensation refined to ecstasy, of pride elevated to divinity. The Dark Prince saw Frieza's narcissism and mistook it for kinship. But Frieza's self-love was not indulgence. It was calculation. He admired himself because he was objectively superior. Not through hedonism, but through discipline. Slaanesh offered pleasure. Frieza had transcended the need for anything beyond power. Nurgle extended his rotting hand, promising immortality, the end of struggle, acceptance of all things in the great cycle of decay and rebirth. Frieza laughed. Not the theatrical cackle he used to unnerve subordinates, but genuine amusement. He had died before. Resurrection had taught him that death was merely inconvenient, not inevitable. He needed no god's gift to escape mortality. He would do so through strength alone. Tsinch was last and most dangerous. The architect of fate offered knowledge, control over destiny, the power to reshape reality through will and scheme. Of all the dark gods, Tsinch came closest to tempting him. But even the changer of ways failed to understand what he faced. Frieza did not want to manipulate fate. He wanted to become so powerful that fate had no choice but to accommodate him. The Chaos Gods withdrew, not in defeat but in fascination. They had witnessed something unprecedented. A mortal soul so complete, so perfectly crystallized around a singular purpose, that corruption found nothing to corrupt. Frieza was not virtuous. Virtue implies moral choice. Frieza had simply transcended the weaknesses that made corruption possible. His evil was too pure, too refined, too disciplined to be altered by the warp's chaotic influence. Demons continued to circle, but they did not attack. They observed, reported to their masters. This new presence in the Imperium represented something novel, a will that matched divine sovereignty without divine nature. A tyrant who needed no warp's blessing because he had already blessed himself with absolute conviction. Frieza began to move through the warp, not swimming but willing himself forward. The sea of souls parted before him, not out of respect, but because his presence created a space where his reality took precedence. Where his will, honed over decades and perfected through isolation, imposed order on chaos through sheer insistence. He could feel the material realm nearby, a thin membrane separating madness from reality. Frieza reached for it, his power coiling around him like a dark star, and tore through. The warp shuddered. The Chaos Gods watched. And somewhere, deep in the Imperium's infinite depths, something ancient and terrible began to smile. The game had changed. A new player had entered the board, and this player recognized no rules but his own. The planet was called Varos Prime, an imperial frontier world clinging to civilization by its fingernails. For 3 months the orcs had been coming. Green-skinned tides of muscle and madness howling their savage joy as they crashed against imperial defenses. Guardsmen died by the thousands. Chimeras burned. Basilisks fired until their barrels melted. The citizens prayed to the god Emperor for deliverance. Their prayers were answered, just not by the god they expected. The sky tore open, not with the green luminescence of orc teleportation, not with the crimson slash of chaos incursion. The tear was black, rimmed with violet energy that made reality itself seem fragile. And through that wound in the world stepped something that made both Imperial and Orc forces pause mid-battle. Frieza descended like a dark comet, his black and purple form pristine against the smoke and carnage below. He did not hurry, did not charge into battle like the brutish Orcs or march with the grim determination of Imperial forces. He simply lowered himself to the ground with the casual grace of someone inspecting property he already owned. An Orc war boss, standing 3 meters tall and festooned with crude bionics, saw the strange figure and did what Orcs do best. It charged, bellowing a challenge that shook the battlefield. Its followers, thousands of greenskin warriors, surged forward in a tide of violence and enthusiasm. Frieza raised one finger. The war boss exploded. Not burned, not shot. Exploded as if every molecule in its body had simultaneously decided to occupy different locations. The death beam, thin as thread and bright as a dying star, continued through the orc horde. One shot, one casual gesture, and a canyon of vaporized flesh appeared where 5,000 orcs had been standing. The battlefield fell silent. Frieza surveyed the stunned armies with the expression of someone who had found the accommodations beneath his standards. His tail swished behind him, the only movement in a world that had forgotten how to breathe. Then he spoke, his voice carrying across the wasteland with unnatural clarity. How disappointing. I was told this galaxy contained warriors worth my attention. The remaining orcs, never blessed with an overabundance of survival instinct, attacked. Trucks roared forward. Death Dreads stomped toward this new enemy. Storm boys jetted overhead, their crude rockets trailing black smoke. The green tide, momentarily shocked, remembered its purpose and crashed forward with renewed fury. Frieza did not move from where he stood. Energy exploded from his body in a dome of obliteration. No special attack. Simply power, released with the same casualness a human might exhale. The shockwave expanded at supersonic speed, and everything it touched ceased to exist. Even the ground itself vaporized, leaving a perfect crater a kilometer wide with Frieza standing untouched at its center. The Imperial forces, positioned on the other side of the battlefield, watched through scopes and auger arrays. Commissars barked orders that no one followed because no one could process what they had witnessed. A single entity had accomplished in seconds what 3 months of grinding warfare had failed to achieve. Frieza rose into the air, surveying the planet below with the dispassionate gaze of a landlord inspecting property. His scouter, that elegant piece of technology that had served him across countless conquests, fed him information. Population centers, military installations, power sources. Weak. All of it unbearably weak. He targeted the largest remaining orc concentration, a massive encampment 50 kilometers distant where the Xenos had been marshaling for a final assault on the Imperial capital. Frieza raised both hands, energy coalescing between his palms. Not the golden orb of his death ball. Not the purple sphere of his supernova. Something new. Something he had perfected during those 10 years of isolation. The blast screamed earthward like the wrath of vengeful gods. The explosion could be seen from orbit. The mushroom cloud rose 20 kilometers into the atmosphere. Seismic sensors across the planet registered the impact as a magnitude 9 earthquake. And when the dust cleared, a molten crater 12 kilometers across marked where the orc army had been preparing its final offensive. Frieza lowered his hands and turned his attention to the Imperial lines. The guardsmen, those brave or foolish souls who had held the line against impossible odds, found themselves facing something far more terrifying than orcs. Where the greenskins offered the clean certainty of brutal death, this being radiated something worse. Intelligence. The absolute conviction of superiority. A commissar, either courageous or mad, raised his bolt pistol. Before he could fire, Frieza's eyes flashed. The commissar exploded into red mist, his weapon clattering to the ground beside his boots, which remained upright, still containing his feet. "I am not your enemy," Frieza said, his voice carrying false benevolence. "I am not your ally, I am your new reality. This world now serves me. Resist, and join your commissar. Comply, and you may continue your insignificant existence under proper management." He did not wait for a response. Frieza had delivered similar speeches on hundreds of worlds. The pattern never changed. Initial resistance, swift demonstration, then the beautiful cascade of submission as survival instinct overwhelmed pride. This world would be the first of many, a foothold in a galaxy that had not yet learned to fear his name. Frieza smiled, that cold expression of satisfaction that had preceded the fall of empires. The conquest had begun. The Inquisition received the report 14 hours after Varro's Prime went silent. At first, they dismissed it as orc interference with astropathic communication. When 3 additional worlds reported a similar entity and then ceased all transmission, the Inquisition began paying attention. When an entire subsector fell dark within a week, they declared it an Ordo Xenos matter of highest priority. Inquisitor Karnak was assigned to investigate. He arrived with a strike cruiser, 2 companies of space marines from the Crimson Blades chapter, and the absolute certainty that he had seen every horror the galaxy could produce. Chaos corruption, Genestealer infiltration, Necron awakening. Whatever had claimed these worlds would fall before the Emperor's wrath like all the others. He lasted 17 minutes. The strike cruiser approached Varro's prime with weapons primed and shields at maximum. Auger arrays swept the planet, detecting impossible energy readings emanating from the capital city. Not warp signatures, not technological emissions. Something entirely outside Imperial understanding of physics. Frieza was waiting in the governor's palace, seated on a throne he had casually murdered the previous occupant to acquire. When he sensed the approaching warship, he rose, stepped onto the balcony, and launched himself into the void without ceremony or protection. The bridge crew of the strike cruiser watched their screens in confusion as a humanoid figure accelerated toward them through hard vacuum. The captain ordered lance batteries to fire. Massive beams of concentrated energy, capable of cutting through battleship armor, lanced toward the approaching target. Frieza swatted them aside like bothersome insects. He landed on the hull with enough force to crumple the armor plating. Then he began to walk along the ship's surface, his movements casual, as if strolling through a garden rather than the lethal void of space. He reached the bridge viewport, pressed his face close to the armored glass, and waved. The captain ordered the bridge sealed and vented the surrounding compartments, hoping to blast the intruder into space. Frieza remained exactly where he was, smiling. Then he tapped the viewport with one finger. The armored glass, designed to withstand meteor impacts and void pressures, shattered. The bridge explosively decompressed. Frieza stepped through the maelstrom of escaping atmosphere into the bridge, walked calmly to the captain's chair as crew members were sucked screaming into space, and sat down. "I believe we should discuss terms," he said to the dying captain. The Crimson Blade Space Marines, those genetically enhanced warriors who knew no fear, deployed via boarding torpedoes. 40 warriors in power armor, each a veteran of a century's warfare, converged on the bridge with bolters roaring and chainswords screaming. They found Frieza waiting, examining his nails with apparent boredom. The battle lasted 30 seconds. Frieza moved like liquid death, too fast for even enhanced reflexes to track. Bolter rounds exploded harmlessly against his aura. Chainswords shattered against his skin. He killed with contemptuous efficiency, demonstrating the galaxy-wide gap between enhanced humans and genuine supremacy. When the last Space Marine fell, his armor crushed like aluminum foil around his broken body, Frieza addressed the ship's internal Vox system. "I am told your Imperium worships a corpse, a barely living thing trapped on a golden chair, sustained by the daily sacrifice of thousands. You call this entity the Emperor." Frieza's voice dripped with amused contempt. "How pathetic. Your master cannot even leave his throne, yet you call him supreme. Allow me to demonstrate what a true emperor looks like." He walked through the ship, killing as he went. Not with urgency, not with anger, with the methodical thoroughness of someone removing vermin from a new acquisition. Crew, servitors, even the ship's navigator died beneath his hands. When he reached the engine room, Frieza placed one palm against the plasma reactor and released a controlled burst of energy. The strike cruiser exploded in a flash visible from the planet's surface. Frieza descended back to Varro's prime, his armor unmarked, his expression pleased. He had made his statement. Now the Imperium would respond with appropriate force, and he would demonstrate why their appropriate force was laughably inadequate. They sent Titans next. The Legio Metallica deployed a maniple of 5 god machines to Hellstrom IV, the largest world Frieza had claimed. Warlord Titans, walking cathedrals of destruction, each carrying weapons capable of leveling city blocks. The princeps piloting these behemoths had destroyed Orc Gargants, Chaos Knights, and Tyrannid Bio-Titans. They approached with confidence and fury. Frieza met them in an open field. The lead warlord, Dominus Invictus, fired its plasma annihilator. The blast could have vaporized a city block. Frieza caught it in one hand, the superheated plasma swirling harmlessly around his palm. He compressed it, condensing the energy into a sphere the size of a marble, and flicked it back. The return shot punched through the Titan's void shields, through its adamantium armor, through its reactor, and out the back. Dominus Invictus toppled, a smoking ruin before its crew understood they were dead. The remaining 4 Titans opened fire simultaneously. Volcano cannons, Gatling blasters, Apocalypse missile launchers. Enough firepower to level mountain ranges. Frieza disappeared, his speed making him invisible to the Titans' targeting systems. He reappeared on the shoulder of the second warlord, placed his hand against the hull, and released a pinpoint burst of energy. The Titan's head exploded from internal overpressure. One by one, with casual brutality, Frieza dismantled the maniple. He moved between god machines like a predator among cattle, striking with precision and overwhelming force. When the last Titan fell, its legs severed at the knee joints, Frieza stood atop its massive corpse and broadcast a message across all Imperial frequencies. Your corpse god could not save them. Your machines could not stop me. Your warriors died like insects. I am Frieza, the only true emperor this galaxy has ever known. Every world that resists will burn. Every commander who opposes me will die. And when your golden throne finally crumbles, I will be there to claim what should have been mine from the beginning. Absolute dominion. In the throne world of Terra, in the dark halls where the Inquisition plotted and schemed, the assessment was updated. Frieza was upgraded from Xenos threat to extinction level event. The High Lords of Terra convened emergency sessions. Chapter Masters were summoned. The machinery of the Imperium, slow and ponderous, began to turn its full attention toward this new enemy. But machines turned slowly, and Frieza moved like lightning given malicious intent. Worlds fell like dominoes. In the realm of chaos, beyond the thin membrane separating reality from madness, the dark gods convened. Not in any physical space, for they transcended such limitations, but in the strange confluence where their domains touched and overlapped. Khorne's endless battlefields bled into Slanesh's palaces of excess. Nurgle's gardens of decay crept toward Sanchez's impossible fortresses. And at the center where all four domains met, they focused their attention on the anomaly. For weeks they had watched him rampage across the material realm. Each world he conquered, each army he destroyed, each act of tyrannical dominance should have fed them. Violence for Khorne, pride for Slanesh, decay for Nurgle, ambition for Tsing. Yet this creature's actions produced no warp resonance. His emotions, if he possessed them, created no psychic ripples. He existed in their galaxy, but refused to be part of their game. Unacceptable. Khorne moved first because Khorne was never patient. The blood god did not send servants or whisper promises. He sent manifestation. On the contested world of Black Rock the Seventh, where Frieza was executing the planetary governor for insufficient obedience, reality tore apart. Blood letters poured through, hundreds of crimson demons wielding hellblades that could cleave through Terminator armor. Frieza paused mid-execution, dropped the governor's corpse, and turned to face the demonic horde with interest. Ah, something different, how refreshing. The bloodletters charged, their inhuman shrieks piercing the air. Frieza raised both hands and released a wave of energy that would have devastated a city. The demons caught in the blast simply ceased to exist, not banished to the warp, but annihilated completely. Their essence destroyed so thoroughly that not even Khorne could immediately reclaim them. The blood god felt something unprecedented. These were his demons, fragments of his own power, and this mortal had not merely killed them but erased them. Khorne's attention, already focused on Frieza, became absolute. A bloodthirster manifested. Gargantuan, wreathed in flame, wielding an axe the size of a battle tank. It was Greater Demon, a shard of Khorne himself given terrible form. It pointed its weapon at Frieza and bellowed a challenge that shattered windows 5 kilometers away. Frieza cracked his neck. Finally, a warm-up worth my time. The battle that followed was brief and instructive. The bloodthirster attacked with the fury of a god's wrath. Its axe, empowered by eons of slaughter, could cut through reality itself. Frieza dodged with contemptuous ease, his movements precise and minimal. When the demon overextended, Frieza struck. One punch, center mass. The bloodthirster exploded into fragments that dissolved before hitting the ground. Khorne felt it in his domain. Pain. Not physical, for gods do not have flesh to wound, but something deeper. Humiliation. This mortal had destroyed one of his mightiest servants with the same effort others might swat a fly. The blood god withdrew, not in fear, but to reassess. Slanesh tried seduction where Khorne had tried force. On the pleasure world of Carnelian III, Frieza found himself surrounded not by armies but by beauty. Demonettes materialized, their forms perfectly calibrated to embody temptation. They did not attack. Power beyond measure, pleasure beyond imagining. The fulfillment of every desire he had ever suppressed during those 10 years of training. Frieza looked at them with the expression someone might reserve for particularly insistent vermin. I am already perfect. What could you possibly offer that would improve perfection? The demonettes, confused, tried different approaches. They showed him visions of worshipping subjects, galaxies kneeling before his throne. Immortality sealed not through power but through transformation into something greater than mortal. Each offer more elaborate than the last. Frieza destroyed them all with casual bursts of energy. Slaanesh, watching from the Dark Prince's realm, felt something close to offense. This creature was pride incarnate, narcissism refined to its purest form. He should have been the easiest to corrupt, yet he rejected every offer with genuine contempt. The Dark Prince's attention lingered, fascinated despite the failure. This Frieza was a puzzle worth solving. Nurgle extended his hand with fatherly patience. Plagues manifested on the worlds Frieza had conquered, not to kill, but to demonstrate. Life and death, an eternal cycle. The inevitability of decay. The peace of accepting entropy. Nurgle's message was clear. Stop fighting. Stop striving. Accept the natural order and find contentment in the great circle of existence. Frieza's response was to incinerate 3 entire infected worlds, cleansing them with such thorough destruction that even bacteria ceased to exist. He broadcast a message into the warp itself, his voice carrying through the Imperium with impossible clarity. I have died before, twice. Both times I returned stronger. Death is not a cycle to accept. It is a weakness to overcome. Keep your plagues, rot god. I will outlive your entropy through sheer refusal to cooperate. Nurgle chuckled, a sound like distant thunder over swamps. This one was amusing. The Plague Lord withdrew, content to watch how this drama unfolded. Time was, after all, his ally. Everything rotted eventually. T-Sanch approached last and with greatest care. The architect of fate did not manifest, did not send demons. Instead, he arranged coincidences, paths that led Frieza toward ancient artifacts, encounters with beings that could explain the warp's nature. Information presented in ways designed to make Frieza reach for greater understanding. Because Teench understood what his brother gods did not. Frieza could not be forced or seduced. But perhaps he could be educated, shown that power in this galaxy operated by different rules. That to truly dominate, he would need to master the warp itself. Frieza saw through it immediately. On the 7th coincidental encounter with warp-related phenomena, he stopped, looked directly into the sky, and spoke to the god he knew was watching. I know what you're doing. Schemer. You think yourselves masters of fate because you can shuffle variables and call it destiny. Let me clarify something. I do not bend reality to my will through manipulation. I bend it through superior strength. Your elaborate plans mean nothing when I can simply destroy every piece on the board. To demonstrate, Frieza located the nearest warp rift, flew directly into it, and began systematically destroying every demon he encountered. Not banishing. Destroying. His energy tore through the Imperium like burning paper, creating wounds in the warp that confused mortal and demon alike. Teench retreated, his infinite schemes recalculating. This variable did not fit established patterns. The 4 Chaos Gods withdrew to their domains, each considering what they had learned. This Frieza creature was not incorruptible through virtue. He was incorruptible through completeness. His ego needed no inflation. His rage required no stoking. His ambition acknowledged no master. His certainty accepted no decay. He was, in his own terrible way, already everything chaos could offer. A perfect tyrant who served no god because he recognized only one authority. His own. The dark gods did not abandon their designs. Gods are patient, and this galaxy offered infinite time for infinite schemes. But they learned caution. This new player in the great game could not be recruited. He would have to be destroyed, or, more intriguingly, allowed to destroy himself. Deep within the Imperial Palace, buried beneath layers of reality-warping machinery and psychic shielding, the Emperor of Mankind sat upon the golden throne. For 10,000 years he had endured this living death. His body, ravaged by the treachery of his favorite son, sustained only by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers. His consciousness stretched thin across the galaxy, holding back the tides of chaos through sheer psychic might. He was aware of everything and nothing. The vast scope of his perception meant individual details blurred into the great tapestry of galactic fate. A space marine's death here. A saint's emergence there. Chaos incursions, Xenos invasions. The slow, grinding entropy of the Imperium he had built. But this was different. The Emperor felt it like a splinter driven beneath the fingernail of fate. A presence that should not exist. A will that carved its own path through destiny with such force that even the carefully laid schemes of the Chaos Gods bent around it. Not through warp power, not through psychic might, through something else entirely. The Emperor focused his attention, that vast and terrible consciousness turning like a searchlight toward this anomaly. What he perceived sent ripples through the Astronomicon itself, causing navigators across the galaxy to gasp in their shielded chambers. Another Emperor, not in title. Titles were meaningless, but in essence, in the absolute conviction of supremacy, in the will to dominate reality itself through sheer refusal to accept limitation. The Emperor recognized it because he had embodied it for 40,000 years. The certainty that he alone knew what was best, that his vision justified any sacrifice, that the galaxy required an iron hand to survive the dark. He saw Frieza standing atop a conquered world, and for the first time in millennia, the Emperor felt something approaching recognition. The Emperor had unified Terra through conquest, so had Frieza unified his empire. The Emperor had fought gods, so had Frieza destroyed divine beings. The Emperor had sacrificed countless lives for his vision of order. Frieza had murdered billions for his vision of supremacy. Different method, different goals. The same fundamental conviction that they alone possessed the right to rule. In the warp, where thought and reality blurred, the Emperor reached out. Not to communicate, not yet. Simply to measure. To understand what new variable had entered the equation of galactic survival. Frieza felt it immediately. He was in the process of accepting the surrender of yet another Imperial world when the presence washed over him. Powerful beyond anything he had encountered in this strange galaxy. Not the chaotic hunger of the warp gods. Something more focused, more intelligent, more dangerous. For the first time since arriving in this reality, Frieza stopped smiling. The presence did not attack, did not threaten. It simply observed, the way a scientist might examine a particularly interesting specimen. Frieza bristled at being analyzed like some laboratory curiosity. His power flared, black and violet energy crackling around him. The presence responded in kind, not with energy but with psychic might. For just a moment, the barrier between the material realm and the warp thinned, and two emperors perceived one another across the vast gulf of space and ideology. The Emperor saw a creature of absolute self-certainty. No doubt, no hesitation. No room for anything beyond personal supremacy. He saw the corpses of civilizations in Frieza's wake, not sacrificed for some greater purpose but destroyed because they dared to exist without permission. Power wielded not for humanity's survival, but for one being's satisfaction. Frieza saw a dying god clinging to a rotting empire. A being of immense power reduced to a battery, sustaining a civilization that had forgotten how to progress. He saw the daily sacrifices, the endless suffering, the trillions living in poverty and ignorance while worshipping a corpse that could no longer leave its chair. They did not speak. Speech would have been inadequate, but understanding passed between them nonetheless. The Emperor recognized Frieza as a threat beyond conventional comprehension. Not because of power, though that was significant, but because Frieza represented an alternative, a different kind of tyranny. Dynamic where the Imperium was stagnant. Individualistic where the Emperor required collective sacrifice. A rule based not on divine mandate but on simple, undeniable superiority. Frieza recognized the Emperor as the only entity in this galaxy who might actually challenge him. Not the hungry gods of chaos who were powerful but ultimately reactive. Not the Xenos races scrambling for survival. But this ancient being who had conquered a species, reshaped a galaxy, and maintained an iron grip on reality for 100 centuries. The moment stretched. Two tyrannies measuring each other across the void. Two emperors, each convinced of their absolute right to rule, calculating how this new dynamic altered their dominion. The Emperor withdrew first, not from weakness but from calculation. He was bound to the Golden Throne. Leaving it would mean Terra's death and the collapse of the Imperium. He could not confront this threat directly, not without sacrificing everything he had endured millennia to preserve. But he could prepare, could guide, could ensure that when the confrontation came, the Imperium would be ready. Frieza smiled again, but it was different now. Colder. More focused. So the corpse god notices me at last. Good. I was beginning to think this galaxy had grown too comfortable in mediocrity. He turned to the planetary governor kneeling before him, terror and confusion warring on the man's face. Tell your Imperium, tell your priests and generals and inquisitors, tell them that I have met their emperor, and I found him adequate, not impressive, not overwhelming, merely adequate, which means he is conquerable, and what can be conquered will be conquered. The governor stammered a response, but Frieza had already lost interest. His mind raced with new calculations. The emperor was powerful, yes, perhaps more powerful than anything Frieza had faced in this reality. But power was not victory. Frieza had spent 10 years learning to overcome beings who could destroy universes. One psychic, no matter how ancient or mighty, would fall like all the others. On Terra, deep in the throne room, the Emperor's custodians noticed their master's agitation. The astronomicon flickered. Astropaths across the segmentum received fragmented visions. A black star rising. A golden throne cracking. Two suns unable to share one sky. The High Lords of Terra, oblivious to the deeper currents, continued their political maneuvering. The Inquisition pursued their investigations. The Imperial war machine ground forward, crushing rebellion and Xenos alike with the same methodical brutality it had employed for millennia. But in the hidden places, among those sensitive to the warp's currents, realization began to dawn. The galaxy was approaching a crossroads. Two visions of absolute rule. Two emperors who would accept no rival. One living, one dying, both unwilling to compromise. The collision was inevitable. The only question was when and how much of the galaxy would survive the impact. The galaxy burned and Frieza smiled at the flames. What began as scattered resistance crystallized into something unprecedented. The Imperium, Chaos, and even opportunistic Xenos factions recognized a simple truth. Frieza represented extinction, not the gradual decline of the Imperium, not the chaotic transformation of chaos, pure erasure. The replacement of every existing power structure with the boot heel of one supreme tyrant. They could not allow it. The 14th Black Crusade ground to a halt as Abaddon the Despoiler received communion from the Chaos Gods themselves. Their message was clear. Set aside the long war. Destroy this interloper. Afterwards, the galaxy would be theirs to claim. Abaddon, who had spent millennia bleeding the Imperium, turned his forces toward this new threat with grim purpose. The Imperium mobilized with a totality not seen since the Horus Heresy. Chapter masters from across the galaxy convened. The Adeptus Mechanicus unleashed war machines from the darkest vaults of Mars. The Inquisition suspended all other operations. Even the normally squabbling High Lords presented a united front. The Eldar, watching from their craft worlds, consulted the skeins of fate and saw only darkness where Freyza's path intersected with theirs. The Orcs, always eager for a good fight, converged on his empire with unprecedented numbers. Even the Tyranids, those mindless devourers, seemed drawn to this new concentration of power. Frieza met them all with contemptuous efficiency. The first major engagement occurred above the forge world of Metallos Prime. Abaddon brought 300 warships, including his flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. The Imperium contributed 4 full battle fleets. Between them, enough firepower to crack a continent. They coordinated their attack with the precision of desperation, targeting Frieza's command ship simultaneously. Frieza was not on the command ship. He was in the void between fleets, waiting. When the bombardment began, he moved, faster than augurs could track, faster than targeting systems could acquire. He entered the Chaos Fleet like a bullet through silk. Ships exploded as he passed, their hulls buckling from proximity to his aura. He found the Vengeful Spirit, that ancient vessel that had carried the Archtraitor himself, and landed on its bridge. Abaddon faced him, clad in Terminator armor, wielding the demon sword Dratnian. The Despoiler, who had humbled champions and broken armies, met Frieza's gaze and felt something he had not experienced in millennia. "You are the one they fear," Abaddon said, his voice amplified by his armor. "You do not belong to chaos. You serve no god. What do you want?" Frieza tilted his head, considering the question with genuine thought. "Want? I suppose I want what I have always wanted. Everything, absolute control over all. Things, every world, every life, every choice, all of it answerable to me alone. That is madness. Even gods must share power. Then gods are weak, Frieza replied and attacked. The duel lasted 7 seconds. Drachnian, the demon blade that could wound the Emperor himself, shattered against Frieza's arm. Abaddon's Terminator armor crumpled. The despoiler, that terror of the Imperium, died without ceremony or drama. Simply stopped existing when Frieza's fist punched through his chest and obliterated the chaos-tainted organs within. The Chaos Fleet broke, not retreated. Centuries of discipline and corruption could not overcome the primal terror of watching your commander die like a common soldier. The Imperial fleets fared no better. Frieza moved through the void like a plague, destroying ships with casual gestures. Admiral Horath, commanding from the battleship Dominus Eternum, ordered ramming speed. If they could not kill this creature, they would at least take him with them into death. Frieza stopped the battleship with one hand. 6 kilometers of armored warship, engines at full burn, halted mid-charge by a being no larger than a man. He tore the ship in half lengthwise, the shriek of rending metal audible even in the void, and left it drifting in pieces. But the galaxy adapted. After Metalos Prime, the tactics changed. They stopped trying to fight him directly. Instead, they targeted his claimed world simultaneously, forced him to choose which to defend, stretched his attention across multiple fronts. It was a losing strategy, but it was strategy nonetheless. Frieza found himself, for the first time in this galaxy, annoyed. He could destroy any fleet, could obliterate any army, could kill any champion sent against him, but he could not be everywhere at once. While he defended one world, 3 others burned. While he hunted one enemy fleet, 2 more ravaged his borders. The galaxy had learned the only tactic that could work against overwhelming individual power. On Vrax Secundus, a demon Primarch manifested. Magnus the Red, that towering sorcerer who had broken worlds with his mind. They dueled for 6 hours, a battle that shattered reality and sent psychic shockwaves across the sector. Frieza won, but the victory cost time and attention. While he fought Magnus, an Orc Waug overran 4 systems. On Calth Reborn, the Ultramarines deployed their entire chapter. They did not try to kill Frieza. They tried to delay him. Every squad fought with suicidal determination, buying minutes with their lives. Frieza slaughtered them efficiently, but those accumulated minutes allowed Imperial forces to evacuate 3 hive worlds he had targeted. The Tyranids adapted in their own terrible way. They learned to avoid direct confrontation. Instead, they consumed the infrastructure of his empire. Agricultural world, mining operations, transport routes. They turned Frieza's logistical network into a battleground, forcing him to waste power protecting supply lines. Frieza began to understand the true nature of this galaxy. It was not weak. It was experience. Thousands of years of apocalyptic warfare had taught it how to survive existential threats. Not through heroism or superior power, but through brutal, pragmatic attrition. He retaliated by escalating beyond reason. Entire subsectors were purged. Not occupied. Purged. Every planet sterilized. Every moon cracked. Frieza demonstrated that if the galaxy would not kneel, he would simply remove the parts that resisted. The death toll climbed into the trillions. Refugees fled before his advance in waves that overwhelmed even the Imperium's capacity to process them. The warp reacted to the carnage. Storms intensified. New rifts tore open. The galaxy's pain fed the Chaos Gods, strengthening their hold on reality. Ironically, Frieza's campaign of domination was accomplishing what the Black Crusades had failed to achieve: the weakening of the barrier between material and immaterium. T-Sanch watched and smiled. Plans within plans. Nurgle observed and waited. All things rot eventually. Korn wrote approval. Blood for the blood god, regardless of whose hand spilled it. Slaanesh laughed. Such perfect pride, such exquisite excess. But Frieza noticed none of their satisfaction. He was focused entirely on the immediate problem. The galaxy resisted. Therefore, the galaxy must be broken more thoroughly. He began targeting warp rifts themselves, attempting to seal them through brute force application of energy. It worked. Partially. Minor rifts collapsed under the assault. But larger ones, ancient wounds in reality, proved resilient. And sealing them required his personal attention, further dividing his focus. The Emperor watched from Terra and recognized the pattern. Frieza was supremely powerful, but he was still one being. And the galaxy excelled at grinding down individuals no matter how mighty. The Emperor had endured 10,000 years of this grinding attrition. Could Frieza? The war entered its second year. The body count became meaningless. Entire sectors were depopulated. The Imperium's maps required constant updating as worlds flickered between Frieza's control, Imperial authority, and absolute destruction. And slowly, gradually, Frieza began to sense something he had not felt since arriving in this reality. Resistance that mattered. Not from any single enemy, but from the galaxy itself. As if the universe had decided he was a foreign object to be rejected. His conquest continued. His power remained absolute. But victory, that clean and total domination he had achieved so easily in his home universe, remained frustratingly distant. The galaxy would not kneel. So Frieza would teach it to fear. The war was far from over. Frieza had destroyed gods. He had humbled champions. He had conquered worlds beyond counting. But now he faced something unprecedented. An enemy that could not be punched, blasted, or intimidated. The warp itself. The realization crystallized during a routine conquest. He had arrived at a world called Prospero's Echo, expecting the usual pattern. Resistance. Overwhelming demonstration of force. Submission or annihilation. Instead, he found the planet already consumed by a warp rift. Demons poured through in numbers that defied comprehension, and behind them, the Imperium bled into reality like a wound that refused to close. Frieza sealed the rift with sustained energy bombardment, the same technique that had worked dozens of times before. The rift collapsed, reality reasserting itself. He turned to leave, satisfied. The rift reopened behind him, not slowly, instantly, as if his intervention had never occurred. Frieza turned back, analysis racing. The warp was not simply strong here. It was persistent, purposeful. And it was learning to resist his power through adaptation rather than opposition. He tried again, this time not merely sealing the rift, but attempting to cauterize it, pouring enough energy into the wound to scar reality itself. The rift closed, held for 3 seconds, reopened. For the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Frieza felt something approaching frustration. This was not an enemy he could defeat through superior strength. The warp was not a person to be destroyed or an army to be routed. It was a fundamental aspect of this reality, as intrinsic as gravity or time. Fighting it was like fighting the concept of darkness by punching shadows. But Frieza had not become supreme by accepting limitations. He began researching. Not personally, such grunt work was beneath him. But he had conquered enough Imperial worlds to access their archives. He forced Mechanicus priests to explain warp mechanics at gunpoint. He tortured captured chaos sorcerers for information about Imperium manipulation. He even studied the Eldar, examining their infinity circuits and craft world protections with calculating interest. A picture emerged. The warp responded to emotion, belief, and consciousness. It fed on sentient thought like a parasite. Every living mind in the galaxy strengthened it through fear, hope, rage, and despair. The Emperor held it back through psychic might in the Astronomicon. The Eldar hid from it in Wraithbone sanctuaries. Even chaos itself, for all its power, could not exist without mortal souls to sustain it. Frieza conceived an impossible plan. He would not seal the warp. He would starve it. He began with quarantine. Every world under his control was subjected to absolute isolation. No warp travel. No astropathic communication. No psychers. Anyone showing psychic potential was executed immediately. Not out of fear, but as population control against warp infection. Then he targeted emotion itself. Through a combination of terror and propaganda, Frieza attempted to create populations that felt nothing strongly enough to feed the warp. Citizens were given simple tasks, simple pleasures, simple lives completely devoid of the extreme emotions that strengthened chaos. Hope was crushed through overwhelming displays of his supremacy. Despair was prevented by ensuring basic survival. Rage was impossible when resistance meant instant death. It worked, marginally. In systems where Frieza's control was absolute and prolonged, warp storms began to recede. The Imperium's grip weakened, starved of the emotional resonance it required. The effect was small, barely measurable, but it was real. The Chaos Gods noticed immediately. What Frieza was attempting represented something far more dangerous than military conquest. He was attacking the fundamental nature of their existence. If he succeeded, if he managed to create populations completely isolated from warp influence, the Chaos Gods would weaken. Not die, they were fed by the entire galaxy, not just Frieza's empire, but weaken nonetheless. Unacceptable. The warp began actively resisting Frieza's expansion, not through armies or champions, but through fate itself. His supply lines suffered improbable malfunctions. Conquered worlds experienced spontaneous rebellions despite having no apparent cause. Assassination attempts failed, but they delayed him. Natural disasters struck with suspicious timing. Tzinj, that master of causality, was deploying the full weight of destiny against Frieza's plans. Frieza recognized it for what it was and laughed. So fate itself opposes me now? Good, I was running out of worthy challenges. He began hunting warp nodes, those points where the Imperium pressed closest to reality. Ancient structures from the dark age of technology. Blackstone fortresses. Webway gates. Anything that bridged the material and immaterial. When he found them, he did not study or claim them. He destroyed them utterly, attempting to widen the gap between realities. The Necrons, awoken by his destruction of their ancient technology, began targeting him.